presented by the Strong Blue Line Foundation and powered by Moose Ridge Coffee in Snake River Landing, Idaho Falls. Welcome to the podcast, where former San Antonio police officer, author, and pastor Tim Rupp walks you through real-life scenarios involving our police officers and digs into the depths of facts and opinions on each case. This is Cop Talk, and it starts now.
Hi, welcome to the Strong Blue Line's Cop Talk, where we talk about cop stuff and the current headlines from a Christian worldview. And with me is operations manager for the Rev.FM, Mr. the one and only Gary Austin. Hello, Gary.
Hey, Tim. How's it going?
Here we are. It's almost mid-April. Spring is sprung. We're into that. We are into an Idaho spring.
Yes, we are.
Gary, how would you define, if you were going to explain an Idaho spring to a friend that does not live in Idaho, how would you explain spring in Idaho?
I would explain it as sloppy, wet, and maybe 4 seasons all in one.
In one day. Sometimes, yeah. Spring is, you never know in Idaho, but generally, man, it's cold and wet, warm,
right.
We'll get snow. It'll be gone in 2 days, but
sunshine.
All kinds of crazy weather going on this time of year. But here we are inside where the temperature is just so.
Yes.
So we are thankful for that.
We sure are. Yep, good stuff.
Hey, we got, Gary, we're going to talk about the privilege of working today.
Oh, okay.
Kind of unique, most people push back at that. What do you mean privilege of working? Working is a privilege. It's a privilege. And so we're going to talk about that today.
Perfect. But I like it.
Before we do, let's go to the Officer Down Memorial page and recognize the officers who were killed in the line of duty on this date in history. So I've got another interesting one here, Gary. City Marshal Edward J. Masterson. Okay. Masterson. That may ring familiar to you, I would say.
Yeah.
Dodge City Police Department, Kansas. End of watch Tuesday, April 9th, today, April 9th, 1878. So here we are in Dodge City, back in where Matt Dillon was marshal.
Right.
The fictional Matt Dillon was marshal. Anyways, City Marshal Edward Masterson disarmed a drunk man who was in violation of the town's ordinance against carrying guns. After taking the gun, Marshal Masterson started walking away, but the man produced another pistol and shot him. Marshal Masterson's brother, Bat Masterson. Now, you probably know Bat Masterson.
Yes, that's who I recognize.
He hung out with the Earp boys, Wyatt Earp and his brothers, yeah. Anyways, Bat Masterson was across the street at the time, and he returned fire and killed the subject. Marshal Masterson served with the Dodge City Police Department for a little more than a year. He's survived by his parents and his brothers. He's buried in an unmarked grave at the Maple Grove Cemetery, Dodge City, Kansas. 26 years old, Gary.
So young.
Yeah, and he served for just over a year.
Yeah.
But one of the famous Masterson brothers killed in the line of duty.
Yep.
So there you go.
Man, it never seems to stop or end.
No, it doesn't.
And that's why I like honoring these officers that are downed officers, because it's just so important, I think, to see these things that have happened and for years. That.
Yeah.
Some of them are short stories and others are much longer, but the point of it is it's an officer down.
Yeah, an officer served, and I like going back in history and remembering the ones that we've forgotten about, and then getting more, remembering more the ones that were killed, last year, 2, 3 years, just a couple years back.
Very true.
Who do you have, Gary?
This is Lieutenant Rodney Osborne, Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction in Ohio. End of watch Tuesday, April 9th, 2024, so a year ago.
Just a year ago, yeah.
Lieutenant Rodney Osborne, this is interesting, was shot and killed during a training exercise at the Corrections Training Academy. So he was training at the tactical firing range, and when the incident occurred, and so that's
and so corrections officers, obviously they do not normally carry weapons, but they have weapons available to them.
Okay.
Because they're inside the prisons, and I'm not sure about it depends on if you're in a big facility, you may be walking the wall with a firearm or something, but they also have like SWAT teams that's going to respond to
riots or whatever,
prison riots and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so the guards inside don't have firearms, right? So the prisoners can't take them.
Right, yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. There should be no weapons in there, and so why would you want to bring a weapon into that situation, in that environment?
Right. Well, that's so that's the end of this story. I mean, that's all that they have on it. Not saying what happened, and it doesn't matter. That's probably why they didn't say anything else. But he had served with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction for 13 years. So that's quite a long time. Assigned to the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, serving on the Honor Guard, the Special Response Team, and the statewide Special Tactics and Response Team. In the week prior, what's that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, in the week prior to his death, he had received Employee of the Year recognition. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he had so in that statewide special tactics, I think that's probably like if they have an escaped prisoner, they go look for him.
Oh.
So I think that's because of a statewide special response team, or if they have a riot in another prison, he would probably go being specially trained for that.
Oh, okay.
So you don't think about that when you think of a corrections officer. You think of a guy guarding inside.
Yeah.
But a lot of these guys are highly trained and specialized.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, which makes sense. You got to be.
Yeah, you do. You're dealing with violent criminals.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have nothing to lose.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're in there for life, and they've got nothing to lose. So.
Yep.
Very dangerous situation that they work in. Dangerous environment.
Yeah.
Anyways, and so you wouldn't think, speaking of environments and working environments, it's a privilege to work, like I talked at the beginning. Back in Genesis, man was given work by the Lord, and this was before the fall. That is, this is before sin. Man was given work.
Uh-huh.
And work is a blessing from the Lord, and I know and because sometimes work is boring, sometimes work is hard, sometimes it's tedious, it's pressure, but all of that's because of the fall, because of sin.
Mm-hmm.
But work itself is a blessing from the Lord, and it's a blessing for us to do our work. And we have a guy here, Michael Wilhoite. Now, Michael Wilhoite is an outside linebacker coach for the Denver Broncos. How would you like to be a coach for the Denver Broncos?
Oh, wow. That'd be cool.
That would be a pretty cool job, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, this guy he's a former NFL player, but he was a coach. He's an outside linebacker coach for the Denver Broncos. And let me tell you what happened. He shows up at the Denver International Airport to go for a trip, I guess. And let me read you what happened. Coach Wilhoite allegedly pulled into the departure area in his 2021 gray Ford Bronco in lane 2 and got out of the car, leaving it unattended. Gary, when you go to the airport, you don't leave your car unattended.
No.
We've known that, especially for the last 24 years, since 2001.
Yes.
You don't leave cars unattended. The officer approached his vehicle, and as Wilhoite was returning to it, the officer told him that he could not leave his vehicle unattended. So have you ever been told that by an officer, Gary, that, please don't leave your car unattended, you can't leave it here?
No, I never have.
But, well, that's good for you. But if you do, they're going to say something to you.
Yeah, right.
And so let's say you're dropping off Carrie at the airport, and you leave your car out front unattended, and you come back to your car, and an officer says, excuse me, sir, but you're not supposed to leave your car unattended. What's going to be your response, Gary?
Oh, I will move it right away. I apologize.
That would be a normal response. I'm sorry, sir, or I'm sorry, ma'am. I won't do it again.
Right.
And you're thankful you didn't get a ticket or get it towed off.
Exactly.
You come out there, you could have, where's my car at? Oh, that one, it's gone.
Yeah.
That black Chevy, it's towed away. Anyways, so that's what happened. But instead of saying, I'm sorry, officer, thank you, Wilhoite told the officer, shut the blank up. And the officer once again stated that he could not leave the vehicle unattended. And again, Wilhoite responded saying, quote, shut the blank up, and proceeded to bump the officer in the chest. So, Gary, right away you have disrespect, cursing at the officer, telling him to shut up, and then he bumps him in the chest. This is a professional football player coach who was a professional football player. This was not a small man. This is a big man.
Yeah.
And he just assaulted an officer. Now, here, this would be a minor assault, bumped him in the chest. The officer shoved Wilhoite back away from him. See, the officer here was creating distance. You can't let somebody come up and bump you like that. The officer shoved him to create distance. And then the Broncos coach punched him in the right side of his face with a closed fist.
Unbelievable.
The officer fell to the ground. This is just pure. This is a serious, serious assault now. You've gone from being discourteous and simple assault to felony assault.
Yeah.
Wilhoite started to get back inside his vehicle, and the officer deployed his taser, which struck Wilhoite in the upper left side of his hips and of his left hip area. He closed the driver's door and drove away. The officer suffered injuries to both knees and his jaw, according to the news media. Wilhoite was arrested about 3:25 p.m. on Sunday. So this happened about an hour and a half earlier, and an hour and a half later, the officers went to his house and arrested him. Did he think he can get away with it?
I know. That's what I don't understand.
There are cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
They know who you are.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy.
And witnesses, I would assume, too. I mean, you're at an airport.
You know, it goes, who do you think you are?
Exactly. And I don't even care if he was thinking, well, it's airport police. They're not officially law enforcement, or it's just security guard, or whatever it is. But the attitude of this guy, it is not cool.
You're exactly right. It doesn't matter. This was I think it was a Denver opera. They probably work off duty there, or was airport police. But it doesn't matter if it was an 18-year-old kid who was asked, "Hey, ask people not to park here." It doesn't matter who it is.
No.
You disobeyed the law. You know better, and you can just get away with it because you think you're somebody. Yeah. I guess that's what it is.
Exactly.
So when I read this, I was curious, and it says the Denver Broncos spokesperson said in a statement, quote, we are aware of the situation involving Michael Wilhoite that occurred, and we are in the process of gathering information. So this occurred back in the end of February. And when this came out, so I was wondering what was going to happen, and I looked up, and Sean Payton is the coach of the Denver Broncos, and I was kind of curious what Sean Payton was going to do.
Me too.
With this. And then on March 5th, about a month later, I found an update to it. And this is from Sean Payton, quote, after thorough discussions as an organization, I met with Michael Wilhoite and informed him we have decided to part ways, end quote. So you know what that means, Gary?
What's that?
How would President Trump say it?
You're fired.
That's pretty much it. You're fired. That was the end of it. Coach Payton went on to say this. Coach Payton said, we recognize the serious nature of the allegation against him and believe this is the best course of action at this time. Now, here it is. He is yet to be found guilty, okay? He hasn't been found guilty in court.
Right.
However, there's videotape. There's the statements written. Coach Payton got out ahead of it and said, they didn't fire him the same day immediately, which I agree. You have to investigate.
Yeah, you do.
And to see if the allegations are true. And they talked with them, and I would imagine Coach Wilhoite told him, yeah, I did it. I was dumb, whatever. Whatever the reason, I'm not sure what his response was to Coach Payton. However, the coach fired him. And deservedly so.
I think so, too.
I'll go back to you, Gary. If you went to drop a carry off at the airport and you did this and Ty saw the videotape, what do you think Pastor Ty would do?
I would be released and asked to resign. Maybe not even asked, but told, you're done.
Go back to President Trump.
Yeah, right. You're fired.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There is no reason to think or even believe that, based on our position, that we would lose our jobs. Because
exactly.
of where we serve, what we do, those kind of things. And like you had said, I think before we went on the air, if you had a job at a retail store, maybe not, you would lose your job. But based on what you do, like the coach and what we do, there's a very high expectation that you will uphold the law in everything.
Exactly, because you're representing the organization.
Yes.
If it would have been pulled over and smart off, and it never would have come out, and he said some things, whatever, I don't know. But, I think he still would have got it anyways. He assaulted a police officer.
He did.
That's it. He committed a felony offense.
Yep.
And coaching for the Denver Broncos is a privilege. I'm sure there's people in line that want his job.
Yes.
And it's a privilege, and he is in a position as a leader on that team.
Yep.
And if you're going to let your leaders get away with that, it's the same thing. If I did it, I would no longer be an assistant pastor at Water Springs Church. I guarantee you that. Exactly.
And Coach Payton, I think he made the right choice. He probably saw the evidence, but his decision was, nope, that is not okay. You're done. You're fired.
You're right. Exactly. And like I said, it's a privilege to be employed. Matter of fact, even if I can find it in Colossians, I think it's Colossians chapter 3, if I think, where Paul writes about, or maybe chapter 2, about being working and stuff. We are to be. It's a privilege to work, and we're to have respect for our bosses and the people that we work for. And so, I know a lot of people don't like to work. Remember, kids, I have a granddaughter. She got her first job. All excited about it, and so that's important to have a job, and it's a responsibility to have a job.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the teenagers, they want to have a job because they want freedom. They want to have their own money. They want to be able to buy their own car or whatever it is that money is going to provide for. And it's a sense of responsibility. But you have to show up for work when you're told to show up.
Right.
And we're starting to lose a lot of that, Gary. The people not showing up. When we were down in Arkansas, the house we were staying at, we had some work done on it, and one of the young men that was working for the guy that was doing the work, he was working for him. He just didn't show up for work one day, and they called him and they're like, "Oh, I'm sick today." It's like, why don't you take the initiative to call in sick?
Yeah.
Your boss is, and so the boss fired him. Then the boss felt bad about firing him, and he hired him back. And then he did some other knucklehead things, and he fired him again.
Oh, my goodness.
21-year-old man that, was probably acting like a 14-year-old kid the way he was acting.
Right.
But there has to be some responsibility, and you have to take your job seriously. And when we work, the scripture tells us that we work unto the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know about you, Gary, but I've worked for some really good bosses, and I've worked for a couple knuckleheads.
Me too.
And I'm not saying that, and I'm sure my bosses looked at me a couple times and said, "What that knucklehead Rupp doing? What was he thinking when he did that?" So, but the point I'm making here is, if you're employed if you're an employee, you work for somebody, and ultimately we work for the Lord, and we're to work unto the Lord,
right,
and to honor Him. So and that doesn't mean that if your boss has a right to run over you and treat you like a doormat, but you need to respond properly and respectfully. Even if you're being treated wrongly, then there's ways to address that.
Mm-hmm.
And the bottom line is you don't have to work there.
Right, that's true.
You can quit your job. Well, that's not fair. A lot of things in life is not fair.
Mm-hmm.
And but if you take it to the Lord, sometimes when you're working for somebody that's not the best boss, it allows you to be a witness. In the book of James, we're talking about we have trials, and we are to be thankful for the trials that we'll go through. That's hard to read, Gary.
It is.
It's even harder to do. It's like, I don't want to read that in the Bible, but there it is.
Uh-huh.
There it
Plain
is.
as day.
Yep. And so these are the things we need to do. So it's so important in jobs. I remember my first job, and I've had jobs since I was 10 years old, but I had a responsibility. I was delivering a newsletter on base where my dad worked. He was in the Air Force, and I delivered this newspaper, this like this little newsletter. And man, I had to do it every day. And my dad said, "You do it. You got to do it, even if you don't feel like it." Man, there's days I didn't feel like it, but I did it.
Yeah.
And just a sense of responsibility. So.
Well, several weeks ago, a federal judge in San Francisco had required that the federal employees get their jobs back that Elon and Trump, their administration, had fired, And so it's going to be interesting to see this played out, because it's kind of that same thing of, was it right that the Trump administration was able to fire these probationary workers or whatever it is, but it's kind of like, well, it is a privilege,
right? And there are certain employee rights,
yeah,
but there are also what they call at-will employees.
Yes.
If you're an at-will employee, then that means you're at the discretion of the boss.
Yeah. And
generally, probationary people, they have no rights. If you get a job and you get tenured, or they cannot fire you legally without some kind of reason for doing so.
Uh-huh.
Now, if they just can't afford you anymore, hey, I'm sorry, we're laying you off. They generally give you time and some compensation. Sometimes they don't. But federal employees, the president's the boss,
mm-hmm.
and he can fire you.
Yeah.
And if you're there and you're tenured, then you have to, he has to go through a process of firing you.
Right.
And so if there's a process, and they have to honor that process, process of being terminated.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, just like the generals and the cabinet members, they're at-will employees.
Yeah. Exactly.
He can fire them. That goes back to President Lincoln, man. During the Civil War, he hired and fired generals every other day, it seemed like. You're not doing a good job, you're out of here, you're fired.
True.
Finally got Ulysses S. Grant. He got a general that would do the job, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, Gary, we are out of time, my man.
What?
Yes, we're out of time again. Unbelievable.
Well, good show. Good episode.
Yeah, it was. Enjoy talking about that. And we'll talk more maybe about this privilege of having employment. Anyways, hey, thanks for listening in. If you have a topic or question you want to address on Cop Talk, send me an email. You can email suggestions, questions, comments, or complaints to coptalk@therev.fm. That's coptalk@therev.fm. Thought from the good book today: be assured, an evil person will not go unpunished. Thank you for joining in and helping to make the thin blue line a strong blue line.
Cop Talk is presented by the Strong Blue Line Foundation and sponsored by Moose Ridge Coffee in Snake River Landing, Idaho Falls. Questions and comments are always welcome by email to coptalk@therev.fm. Listen, follow, leave a review, and share this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or YouTube. And visit thestrongblueline.org to learn how you can be a supporter. Cop Talk is a Rev FM production, produced and edited by Gary Austin. Thank you for joining us on Cop Talk.